Welcome to True Crime Case Files, where we delve deep into the most shocking and unsettling criminal cases. Today's episode takes us to San Antonio, Texas, where a beloved baker's life was cut tragically short. As the investigation unfolded, it revealed a web of deceit, betrayal, and a shocking affair that you have to see to believe. Rebecca Becky Frederickson was a 31-year-old woman living in San Antonio, Texas. She was known throughout her community for her warm personality and her incredible talent for baking. Becky owned and operated Sweet Treats, a popular local bakery that had become a staple in the neighborhood. Her shop was known for its delicious pastries, especially her famous chocolate chip cookies and pumpkin spice muffins, a trendy treat beloved by millennials everywhere. Becky had a loyal customer base, many of whom had been coming to her bakery since it first opened. Becky was married to Michael Frederickson, a 35-year-old financial advisor. They had been married for 5 years after meeting at a friend's wedding, and on the surface, their life seemed perfect. They lived in a cozy one-story home not far from the bakery and were well-liked in the community, with Becky often donating cakes and other baked goods to local schools and events, like the annual San Antonio Christmas Parade. However, in the months leading up to her death, Becky had been feeling a growing sense of unease. She noticed that Michael had become distant, often coming home late from work and showing little interest in their marriage even after Becky, who had always dreamed of starting a family, was diagnosed with endometriosis, which made it difficult for her to conceive. Despite these challenges, Becky remained hopeful. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the bakery to perfect new recipes. In September 2019, Becky was preparing for the busy holiday season. She had just begun planning the bakery's Halloween-themed treats, which were always a big hit with customers. But even as she focused on her business, Becky couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in her personal life. She tried to talk to Michael about her concerns, but he always brushed them off, leaving Becky to wonder what was really going on. Becky's friends and customers described her as sweet, generous, and hardworking. She was the kind of person who would go out of her way to help others, and her warm smile was a welcome sight to everyone who knew her. Her death would leave a void in the community that would be hard to fill. On September 15, 2019, at approximately 7:30 a.m., the lifeless body of Rebecca Becky Frederickson was discovered in the kitchen of her San Antonio home. It was a warm Sunday morning, and the city was just starting to wake up. Becky's neighbor, Karen Simmons, a 56-year-old retired schoolteacher, was the one who found her. Karen had noticed that Becky's bakery, Sweet Treats, hadn't opened on time that morning. This was unusual. Becky's bakery was almost always bustling with customers eager for her famous cookies and cakes. Concerned, Karen decided to check on Becky. She walked the short distance to Becky's home, which was just around the corner from the bakery. When she arrived, she found the front door slightly ajar, which immediately set off alarm bells. Becky was always careful about locking up, especially after a few break-ins had been reported in the neighborhood earlier that year. Karen hesitated but then pushed the door open and called out Becky's name. There was no answer. She stepped inside and noticed a strange silence. The house was neat and tidy, except for the kitchen. As Karen entered the kitchen, her heart sank. Becky was lying on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. The rolling pin, which Becky always kept on the kitchen counter, was on the floor beside her, stained with blood. The sight was horrifying. The once warm and welcoming kitchen, where Becky had baked so many treats, was now a crime scene. Karen was in shock but managed to dial 911. Her hands trembled as she gave the dispatcher the address and explained what she had found. She stayed on the line until the police arrived, all the while trying to hold back tears. Karen later told investigators that Becky's face was so badly injured that she could hardly recognize her. When the police arrived, they found Karen standing outside, visibly shaken and in tears. She could barely speak, and the officers had to help her to a nearby bench to sit down. The neighborhood quickly buzzed with news of Becky's death, leaving everyone in disbelief. How could such a kind and gentle woman meet such a violent end? When the San Antonio Police Department received the 911 call on September 15, 2019, officers arrived at the scene within minutes. The responding officers were Sergeant Maria Diaz, a 42-year-old veteran with a reputation for being thorough and compassionate, and Officer James O'Meal, a 28-year-old who had only been on the force for 3 years but was eager to learn. They quickly secured the area, setting up yellow crime scene tape around Becky Frederickson's small single-story home. The quiet neighborhood, typically filled with the scent of fresh pastries from Becky's bakery, was now overtaken by the flashing lights of police cars and the hum of emergency radios. As they entered the house, the officers were struck by the eerie silence. The living room was untouched, with cozy furniture and framed photos of Becky's wedding day displayed on the walls. But as they approached the kitchen, the scene changed dramatically. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and comfort, was now a gruesome crime scene. Becky's body lay in the center of the room. Her blood spattered the white-tiled floor, and the rolling pin, a symbol of her love for baking, was lying nearby, covered in blood. Sergeant Diaz's experience kicked in as she began to assess the situation. The scene indicated a violent struggle. Chairs were knocked over, and a mixing bowl had fallen to the floor, its contents spilled out. Becky's apron was stained with blood, and her hands showed defensive wounds, suggesting she had fought hard for her life. Officer O'Neill took photos of the scene while Diaz carefully noted the details. The forensic team arrived soon after. Led by the team, collected fingerprints, blood samples, and any other evidence that might help piece together what had happened. The medical examiner, Dr. Lillian Pang, a no-nonsense 55-year-old with decades of experience, arrived to examine the body. She noted that Becky had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to her head, and the time of death was estimated to be between 10 p.m. and midnight the previous evening. The brutality of the attack shocked everyone present, including the seasoned investigators. Outside, the news of Becky's death spread quickly. Neighbors gathered, whispering in disbelief. Many of them knew Becky personally, having bought her baked goods for years. The sight of police cars and the knowledge of what had happened inside the house left the community in a state of shock and mourning. As the investigation continued, the police focused on gathering every piece of evidence they could find. They knew that the crime scene held the key to solving this brutal murder. They needed to find out who could have committed such a heinous act against a beloved member of the community. The investigation into Becky Frederickson's murder quickly turned its focus on her husband, Michael Frederickson. Michael, 35, was a well-known financial advisor in San Antonio. To his clients, he was the picture of professionalism, calm, dependable, and trustworthy. He had a strong reputation in the community, often seen at networking events and charity functions. However, behind closed doors, Michaels was far from every woman's dream husband. He was completely different, angry with an insatiable sexual appetite his wife could never fulfill. He was a man of secrets, deeply unhappy with his life and marriage. In the days following Becky's death, investigators dug into Michael's personal life. They learned that the Fredericksons' marriage had been strained for quite some time. Becky's endometriosis diagnosis had not only shattered her dream of starting a family, but also placed significant strain on the sexual aspect of their relationship. Michael, who had once been an attentive and loving husband, grew distant and frustrated. He began spending more time at work and less time at home, often coming back late at night or even after unexplained absences of several days. Colleagues noticed that he seemed stressed, but Michael brushed off their concerns, saying it was just life stuff. The real shock came when police uncovered Michael's affair with Becky's own mother, Margaret Ruth Breedlove. Ruth, who had re-entered Becky's life only a few years earlier, was 48 and still possessed a charismatic charm and smoldering sexually her somewhat restrained daughter couldn't match. The affair had started as a harmless flirtation, but quickly escalated into something much more serious. Michael and Ruth had been secretly seeing each other for sex, even having sex on Becky's bed when she wasn't home. The affair shocked the investigation, painting a picture of a man caught between a troubled mother-daughter relationship and a tangled web of deceit. During his interrogation, Michael initially denied any involvement in Becky's murder. He maintained that he had been at the office late, working on a client's portfolio, and had come home to find Becky already dead. However, as detectives pressed him about his secret sexual relationship with Ruth, Michael's calm demeanor began to crack. He became defensive, insisting that the affair had nothing to do with Becky's death. But when detectives confronted him with evidence of his infidelity, including explicit text messages and naked pictures sent between him and Ruth, Michael's composure shattered. Police noted that Michael's behavior was suspicious, his answers were evasive, and he struggled to provide a clear timeline of his actions on the night of the murder. Investigators also found it odd that Michael showed little emotion when discussing Becky's death, often speaking about her in a detached manner as if she was just some dead person you saw on the news. Despite his attempts to distance himself from the crime, Michael's affair with Ruth provided a strong motive for murder. The pressure on Michael was mounting, and detectives were determined to get to the truth. As the investigation into Becky Frederickson's murder deepened, police turned their attention to Margaret Ruth Breedlove, Becky's 48-year-old mother. Ruth had a complicated history that raised several red flags for detectives. She had re-entered Becky's life just a few years earlier after spending decades living a free-spirited and often reckless lifestyle. Ruth had moved from Oakland, California, to San Antonio to reconnect with her daughter, but her arrival had brought more turmoil than healing. Ruth was a striking woman who had always enjoyed being the center of attention. Even in her late 40s, she maintained a youthful appearance and a sexually magnetic personality that drew people to her. After giving birth to Becky at the tender age of 17 and leaving her in the care of her own mother when Becky was just a child, Ruth had spent years drifting from one job to another and from one relationship to the next. She had worked as a house painter in Oakland, where she was known for her bold fashion choices and colorful personality. Ruth's life took a dramatic turn when she joined a cult known as the Sunshine Family in the late 1990s, a decision that led her to lose contact with Becky for nearly 2 decades. When Ruth finally resurfaced in Becky's life, it was clear that she had not changed much. She was still the same flirtatious, sexual attention-seeking woman she had always been, and she quickly became a disruptive force in Becky's marriage. Ruth openly flirted with Becky's husband, Michael, even going so far as to make out with him in front of her daughter. This behavior strained the new and already fragile relationship between mother and daughter. During her interrogation, Ruth was candid about her affair with Michael, admitting that sex she had been having with Michael was, quote, marvelous. She described the relationship as a passionate, all-consuming love affair that had given her a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. Ruth justified her actions by insisting that Michael was sexually unfulfilled in his marriage and that she was simply offering him the excitement and fulfillment he craved. To Ruth, the affair was not just a fling. It was a deep, soul-to-soul connection that she believed was meant to be. However, Ruth denied any involvement in Becky's murder. She claimed that she had been at home on the night of the killing, watching Real Housewives and sipping a glass of red wine. Her tone during the interrogation was defiant, almost as if she believed that her actions were justified. Detectives noted that Ruth showed little remorse for the affair and seemed more concerned about how the revelation of the relationship would affect her than about her daughter's death. Ruth's lack of empathy in her affair with Michael made her a strong suspect, but there was no direct evidence linking her to the crime. Despite her claims of innocence, investigators were not convinced, and they continued to scrutinize her every move. In the investigation of Becky Frederickson's murder, police also turned their attention to a third suspect, Danny La Culebra Hernandez Basco. Danny, 22, was a figure with a notorious reputation in San Antonio. Originally from Tamaulipas, Mexico, Danny had a long criminal record that included theft, assault, and drug-related charges. His nickname, La Culebra, which means the snake in English, was a reflection of his slippery, dangerous nature. Danny was known to be a rough and intimidating presence in the community. He had been spotted near Becky's bakery several times in the weeks leading up to her murder, leading to rumors that he was involved in some sort of criminal activity in the area. Witnesses reported seeing him lurking around the neighborhood, often dressed in dark clothing and keeping to the shadows. He was the kind of person who made people nervous, someone who seemed always to be on the edge of violence. When police brought Danny in for questioning, they were prepared for a difficult interrogation. Danny, however, surprised them by maintaining his innocence. He claimed he had nothing to do with Becky's murder and that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. According to Danny, he had been in the area to meet up with some old friends from his neighborhood who had recently immigrated to the United States, not to cause any trouble. He insisted that he had never even met Becky and had no reason to harm her. Throughout the interrogation, Danny's demeanor was defensive. He was angry and frustrated, lashing out at the detectives who questioned him. He accused them of targeting him because of his criminal past and his Mexican nationality, calling the investigation a witch hunt. Despite his protests, police remained suspicious of Danny. His violent history and proximity to the crime scene made him a person of interest. However, as the interrogation continued, it became clear that there was little evidence to tie Danny directly to Becky's murder. There were no witnesses who could place him at the scene at the time of the crime, and no physical evidence connected him to the murder. While his presence in the area was suspicious, it wasn't enough to charge him. Danny was eventually released, but police kept him under close surveillance, aware that his volatile nature and criminal background made him a potential threat. As the investigation into Becky Frederickson's murder dragged on without a clear suspect, frustration began to set in for the detectives. But on the morning of September 18, 2019, a breakthrough came when Margaret Ruth Breedlove made a shocking revelation that changed the course of the case. Ruth, during a follow-up interview with detectives, disclosed that she was pregnant, and the father was none other than her own son-in-law, Michael Frederickson. This revelation stunned the police. It added a new layer of complexity to an already tangled web of relationships. Detectives knew that this revelation could be the key to understanding the motive behind Becky's brutal murder. The news of Ruth's pregnancy was a bombshell, suggesting that the affair between Ruth and Michael wasn't just a fling, but something far more serious. With this new information in hand, the police doubled down on their investigation. They decided to re-examine the crime scene and the evidence collected earlier, hoping to uncover any overlooked details. On September 20, 2019, 2 days after Ruth's confession, detectives revisited Becky's house, where the murder had taken place. Inside, the crime scene remained eerily untouched, a stark reminder of the violence that had occurred there. The detectives carefully combed through the area, focusing on the rolling pin that had been used as the murder weapon. Forensic experts reanalyzed the rolling pin, this time looking for any traces of DNA or fingerprints that might have been missed during the initial examination. Meanwhile, detectives also turned their attention to Michael Frederickson. Armed with the knowledge of Ruth's pregnancy, they began to put together a timeline of events leading up to Becky's murder. They learned that Michael had been increasingly anxious in the weeks before the crime, reportedly distancing himself from both his wife and Ruth. He had also made several uncharacteristic mistakes at work, which coworkers later attributed to his distracted state of mind. Could he have known Ruth was pregnant with this child? And could Becky have known this shocking secret? The breakthrough came when detectives discovered a series of deleted text messages on Michael's phone, which they were able to recover with the help of digital forensic experts. These messages revealed a heated argument between Michael and Becky on the night of her death. In the texts, Becky confronted Michael about his affair with Ruth, adding the binky emoji, and Michael, in a panic, admitted to the relationship. The argument escalated quickly, and the final message from Michael suggested he was going to, quote, "F you to death." With this new evidence, the police had what they needed to tie Michael directly to the murder. The text provided a clear motive. Michael had killed Becky in a desperate attempt to escape the fallout from his affair and Ruth's pregnancy. Hey, true crime case solvers interested in more real-life murder mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case solvers. On the evening of September 21, 2019, after uncovering the damning text messages and learning about Ruth's pregnancy, police were confident that they had enough evidence to arrest Michael Frederickson. Michael, 35, was a successful financial advisor in San Antonio, known for his calm and collected demeanor. However, beneath the surface, he was a man trapped by his own secrets and sexual desires. His affair with his mother-in-law, Ruth, and the news that she was pregnant with his child had driven him to a breaking point. The detectives decided to approach Michael at his home, a modest house in a quiet San Antonio neighborhood. They arrived just after 8 p.m. when they knew Michael would likely be home. The air was thick with tension as they knocked on the door. When Michael answered, the TV set to how-to videos about child raising. He appeared tired and on edge, a stark contrast to the composed image he usually projected. The lead detective informed Michael that they needed to talk about new developments in the case. Michael hesitated but allowed them inside. The detectives wasted no time confronting him with the evidence: the recovered text messages, Ruth's pregnancy, and the clear motive that had emerged. As they laid out the details, Michael's calm facade began to crumble. At first, he tried to deny everything, claiming that the messages were taken out of context and that he and Becky had simply argued, as many couples do. But when Detective Diaz mentioned Ruth's pregnancy, Michael's expression changed. The color drained from his face, and he became visibly agitated, pacing the room and avoiding eye contact. Realizing that the police had him cornered, Michael finally broke down. He confessed to the affair and admitted that on the night of Becky's murder, he had lost control. When Becky confronted him about the affair after Ruth literally waved her positive pregnancy test in her infertile daughter's face, he panicked. In a fit of rage and desperation, he grabbed the rolling pin from the kitchen counter and beat her to death with it. He explained that he believed eliminating Becky would somehow solve his problems, allowing him to start a new life with Ruth and their unborn child. The detectives arrested Michael on the spot, reading him his rights as they placed him in handcuffs. Michael offered no resistance. His head hung low in resignation. As the police led him out of the house, neighbors gathered on their porches, shocked to see the man they knew being taken away for such a brutal crime. The extended Frederickson family, devastated by the news, struggled to comprehend how their once loving husband and son-in-law could commit such a heinous act. For them, the arrest marked the beginning of a long and painful journey toward justice. Michael Frederickson's trial began on December 30, 2019, at the Bexar County Courthouse in San Antonio. The case quickly drew attention from local news outlets like KSA 12 and the San Antonio Express News. Reporters lined up outside the courthouse, eager to cover every detail of the shocking murder case involving a respected financial advisor, his wife, and her mother. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Lisa Perez-Brito, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor known for her methodical approach in the courtroom. Perez-Brito painted a chilling picture of Michael as a man driven to murder by the pressure of his affair with Ruth Breedlove and her unexpected pregnancy. She argued that Michael, unable to face the consequences of his actions, brutally killed Becky in a desperate attempt to escape his crumbling life. Perez's case was built around the text messages recovered from Michael's phone, Ruth's pregnancy, and Michael's own confession to the police. On the other side, the defense attorney, Mark Caldwell, tried to portray Michael as a man under extreme emotional distress. Caldwell, known for his ability to sway juries with his empathetic approach, argued that Michael never intended to kill Becky. Instead, Caldwell claimed that the crime was a tragic accident, the result of a heated argument that spiraled out of control. He urged the jury to consider Michael's previously clean record and the stress he was under at the time. Throughout the trial, Becky's family sat in the courtroom, their grief palpable. They listened intently as witnesses took the stand, recounting the events leading up to Becky's death. After a week of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before reaching a verdict. On January 7, 2020, Michael Frederickson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a decision that was met with relief from Becky's family, who felt that justice had been served. The verdict brought some closure to Becky's loved ones, but the emotional scars left by the crime would take much longer to heal. The case left the San Antonio community in shock, a stark reminder of how quickly a seemingly perfect life can unravel. In the aftermath of the trial, the lives of everyone involved in the case changed dramatically. Michael Frederickson began his life sentence at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's William P. Hobby Unit, a stark contrast to the comfortable life he once knew. Behind bars, Michael had plenty of time to reflect on the choices that led him to this point. His reputation in San Antonio was ruined, and he became a symbol of betrayal and deceit. Ruth Breedlove, reeling from the revelations that had come to light during the trial, found herself ostracized by the community. The affair with Michael, once a secret passion, was now public knowledge. Ruth moved out of San Antonio, seeking to start over in a new city where no one knew her story. However, the emotional toll of the trial and the loss of her daughter weighed heavily on her. The pregnancy, once a source of excitement, became a painful reminder of the destruction she had helped cause. Ruth ultimately decided to give the child up for adoption, believing it was the best way to ensure a better future. As the months passed, the story of Becky Frederickson's murder became another tragic chapter in San Antonio's history. But for those who had known her, the loss was a wound that would never fully heal.